Mr. Chairman, our very distinguished visitors, I was from the University of the West Indies until recently. I am now at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. We are developing some new programs in criminology and public safety. This podium was my favorite spot when I was at UB. I give my lectures from this vantage point, so I feel at home, and I want to welcome all of you. Patricia, thanks for deciding to come to Trinidad. It is sure that you will have a good conference. After all, the key organizer here is Tim Shaw, so I guess with a name like that, the assurance is certainly given. I want to be quite concise and run through the presentation because I want to give you something more concrete than my own words. I want to give you an indication of the crime picture, a portrait of crime and violence in the Caribbean, so I want to leave a few minutes for that. To begin with, the emphasis and the growing trend on using global statistics for national policies, to me, can turn out to be a misguided option for two particular reasons. Global statistics tend to ignore, and inevitably so, cultural context in which crime occurs. Secondly, by using global statistics and global policy, with few exceptions, maybe the one on terrorism, narcotic trafficking, and so on. But for the range of crimes for which global statistics are used, and to make the inference about best practice and so on, which are quite attractive to do, we miss the presence of mediating variables which tend to push the explanation for crime in one direction or another, and beyond gross statistics like GDP, poverty, and unemployment. In the Caribbean, those gross indicators do not really explain crime, and therefore we have defective policies, those that seem to use perpetually gross statistics. We in the Caribbean, therefore, if you want to understand what's happening to us and to put it in the global picture for comparison, for further understanding, being vulnerable societies as we are, with border security challenges, being small islands as we are, we need a new methodology, and to put it briefly, one that speaks to motivation, opportunity, and the analysis and the policy development must be situationally driven. You see, if you don't understand motivation in criminal behavior, you'll forever be lost in trying to solve it in other ways without an understanding of motivation. You can kill a terrorist, but unless you don't kill the idea itself behind terrorism, unless you don't damage the motivation or reduce the motivation, which is what Obama's speech was really all about, the motivation for conflict, more precisely terrorism. If you don't kill the idea, meaning the motivation, I don't think policy making can be very effective. As the chairman indicated, there are serious defects in the existing paradigm, to use his words. I remember I was in Turin a few years ago at the invitation of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, and there was a expert group meeting, and Mr. Jan van Dijk, one of the panelists, was making a profound analysis and comparison with Singapore and other countries, and it looked quite a compelling argument in explaining crime and looking how law and order can be controlled, except to say, as I intervened, Singapore has a very different constitutional arrangement from many countries in the world in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and so on. So you cannot ignore context when you're making cross-national comparison, because you will get lost. The other issue in the Caribbean as a whole is this severe lack of accountability in our state institutions, those designed to look after law and order. So you cannot explain crime merely by the statistics. You have to penetrate into the work of the institutions, which in our case are quite weak. And perhaps you can see this defect as one of the symptoms of a developing region. But notwithstanding the explanation or the excuse, I think we have a lot of work to do in accountability. That is, job specifications, performance, evaluation, and sanctions. We are very weak for many reasons, some being political patronage, and some being defects in the institutions themselves, especially in the administration of justice, to demand accountability.
Thank you.
Sorry, the pointer dropped, and my chairman is very helpful. This brings me to a sore point. You see, the relationship between lack of accountability will have to be put alongside the weaknesses in the institution itself. And our administration of justice has so many serious defects that sometimes they are difficult to solve because you have, under the Westminster system, even if it is a loose arrangement, separation of powers. So the executive and even the parliament itself. I'm also a member of parliament, so I can tell you from first-hand experience, it is difficult to correct things in the judiciary without seeming to transgress the separation of powers. So we need not only a new methodology in dealing with crime, we need a new political architecture in the Caribbean to deal with criminal justice and more so the management of crime. The dilemma that faces people like myself, and perhaps all of you who belong to universities especially, is the question of funding. In our region, there are very few, if any at all, I can point out to none really, apart from the international agencies, but any indigenous foundation that provide grants for crime research or research into criminal justice. We get those funds mainly from the government and the other public agencies, which are themselves, in my view, part of the problem in terms of the performance, accountability. So how can you write a proper report, reliable and valid, implicating the very funder who gives you the money? You will only have, there are two chances you will get, your first and last. I am always ambivalent about speaking to an international audience about matters that concern my country, which I love very, very dearly, or about my region. But I guess as academics in the fellowship of scholars, you will appreciate that I have to bring you up to date as far as I can in the true university tradition. So it's not to condemn my country or my society, but it's merely to point the need for a new direction and to emphasize the words of our distinguished chairman once again, to change the paradigm. We have some very serious challenges. The most basic one, in my view, is the one between maintaining our freedoms and trying to deal with matters of security. And that very pervasive challenge is facing the United Kingdom and the United States, and especially smaller countries where the need for security is so forceful, but yet people need to evolve and become civilized in having a society where basic freedoms are maintained.